Uh, Virgo, the silence is breaking, not cracking at the edges, not the tentative, easily resealed fracture of someone who almost said something and then retreated back into the familiar safety of saying nothing. Breaking fully with the specific, irreversible quality of something that has been held together past its structural limit and can no longer sustain the pressure of what is behind it. What is behind it is enormous, has been growing in the contained space of the unspoken for longer than was ever sustainable. And now, in the specific, charged, electrically alive quality of the energy I am feeling in the collective field tonight, it is finding its way out. The silent treatment is ending, not because someone decided strategically that the silence had served its purpose, not because a calculated amount of time was allowed to pass and the calculation finally concluded, because the person on the other side of it has arrived at the place where continuation is simply no longer possible, where the cost of another day of silence exceeds, by a margin that can no longer be rationalized, the cost of whatever the speaking might bring. That place, the breaking point, is not a weak place. I want to name that clearly before anything else, because the phrase breaking point carries a connotation of collapse that is not accurate to what I am reading tonight. What I feel in this person's energy is not collapse, it is capacity exceeded, which is different. Collapse implies failure, the failure of something that should have held. Capacity exceeded implies simply that what was being contained was always too large for its container, that the silence was never genuinely adequate to hold what it was attempting to hold, and that its ending is therefore not the failure of the person who maintained it, but the inevitable victory of the feeling over the strategy of its suppression. The feeling won over the fear, over the pride, over the complicated self protective logic that constructed the silence in the first place and maintained it through every moment when breaking it would have been easier than continuing it, over the calculation and the positioning and the careful management of what was visible and what was not. The feeling simply grew larger than all of that, larger than the container, larger than the strategy, larger, finally, than the fear of what happens when it is no longer hidden. Soft sigh. In the ancient symbolic grammar of the heart's movements, this moment carries the energy of the Ace of Cups overflowing. The image of a vessel full, perfectly full, filled to the absolute limit of its capacity, and then the moment when one more drop arrives and the surface tension that has been holding everything in place simply releases, and what was contained becomes what flows. Not destructively, water released from a full cup does not destroy what it touches. It reaches it, finds it, covers it in the specific, unhurried, completely natural way of something that was always meant to reach that particular ground and was simply waiting in the fullness of the cup for the moment of release. You are the ground, and what is about to reach you has been filling the cup for a very long time. Let me speak about the silent treatment itself, about what it actually was beneath the surface of its apparent indifference. Because silence in love is almost never what it appears to be. It almost never means the absence of feeling. It almost always means the presence of too much feeling, more than the person knows how to manage with you present, more than they trust themselves to contain if contact is maintained, more than the current state of their own readiness allows them to bring into the open without the risk of it spilling in directions they cannot control. The silence was not indifference dressed as distance. It was feeling dressed as indifference. The costume that emotion wears when it has decided, for reasons that made sense at the time, that direct expression is not yet available. And the exhaustion of maintaining that costume, of performing a detachment that was never real, of producing day after day the external signal of not caring when the internal reality was its precise opposite, is what has brought this person to the breaking point. Performing not caring to someone you care about deeply is one of the most exhausting things available to a human being. It requires constant monitoring, the endless vigilance of someone who must track not just what they say, but how they say it, not just what they do, but what they do not do, ensuring that nothing bleeds through the carefully maintained surface of the presentation, that no look lasts a fraction of a second too long, that no response carries more warmth than the performance permits, that the version of themselves they are showing is consistently, convincingly the one that does not feel what it feels. They are tired, profoundly, genuinely, no more reserves, tired. And the tiredness is the breaking point, the specific depletion of the energy required to maintain the silence that leaves only the feeling itself, unmanaged, uncontained, looking for its natural expression. You have been on the other side of this silence, and I want to speak to that experience with the full honesty it deserves. Because being silenced by someone you have genuine feeling for being given the specific, pointed absence of communication from a person whose communication matters to you is one of the more quietly devastating experiences available. It does not announce itself as devastating. It creeps in the form of an unanswered message that you tell yourself means nothing, in the form of a conversation that trails off without resolution, in the form of a presence that becomes gradually and then suddenly an absence, leaving behind it a specific shape in the air that only that person's presence could fill. You have been living with that shape, aware of it every day, negotiating with the part of yourself that wants to reach across the silence and the part that has decided for its own survival that reaching is not something it can afford to do again. Both parts have been right in their own way. The reaching part, right about what the connection deserves. The protective part, right about what you have already given without sufficient return. And now the silence is breaking from their side. Not from yours. You did not have to end it, did not have to be the one to extend across the distance one more time without any guarantee of what you would find on the other side. It is ending from their side, which changes something fundamental about the dynamic, which places something in your hands that the previous arrangement did not give you. Soft sigh. Agency. Real, genuine, grounded in their movement agency over what happens next. Because when the silence breaks from their side, when they are the one who closes the distance, who reaches across what they created, who arrives at your door with whatever they are arriving with, you are no longer in the position of someone waiting for a response. You are in the position of someone being responded to, someone whose worth has been confirmed by the very act of the other person's breaking, by the proof embedded in the ending of the silence that what they were trying to manage was too large to manage indefinitely. That proof matters. Let it matter. Let the evidence of their breaking, the fact that it was their capacity, not your worth, that determined the duration of the silence, settle into the place in you that has been quietly wondering whether you were worth the reaching. You were always worth the reaching. Their silence was never a verdict on that. It was a report on their own limitations. And the ending of it is a report on what happens when someone's limitations finally yield to something larger than themselves. Now, what comes through the breaking? Because the silence ending is not the destination, it is the opening through which something is about to move. And what moves through it will carry the specific, unfiltered, no longer managed quality of everything that was accumulating on the other side. For some of you in this collective reading, what comes through is an apology. Not the performative kind, the social gesture of someone going through the motions of repair without the genuine reckoning that repair requires. The real kind, the kind that costs something, that arrives with a quality of vulnerability that only comes from someone who has sat with the full weight of what they did, not just the act of the silence, but the effect of it on you in the specific and costly ways that their absence registered in your life and has arrived through that sitting at genuine accountability. For others, what comes through is not an apology but a declaration. The thing that the silence was protecting them from having to say, the feeling at the center of it all. The truth that was too large and too exposed and too irreversible to be spoken while the silence was still available as an alternative. That truth finally, without its shelter, finding its way to you directly, in whatever words they manage to find for it, in whatever form it takes when it is finally allowed to simply be what it is. And for others still, and this is the dimension I feel most strongly in the in-depth quality of tonight's collective energy, what comes through the breaking of the silence is a question. The most important question available in the geography of this connection, the one that the silence was built to avoid having to ask, because asking requires being willing to receive the answer regardless of what it is. A question about whether what exists between you, the specific, mutual, neither of you fully named thing that has been present through the silence as surely as it was present before, it is something that can be brought into the open, built upon Given the chance, finally, and without the protective ambiguity of the unspoken, to become what it has always had the potential to become, that question deserves an answer from your truest self, not from the wounded self, the one that is still feeling the cost of the silence and wants legitimately for that cost to be acknowledged before anything else moves forward. Not from the hopeful self, the one that wants so much for this to become what it could be, that it would answer yes before fully examining what yes requires. From the truest self, the one that knows what it actually needs, what it will and will not accept, what evidence of genuine change would look like, what the connection would need to contain going forward to be something worth the investment of the full and unguarded version of your heart. Know that answer before the question arrives. Not to perform readiness, to actually be ready to have done in the time between now and their reaching the private interior work of locating yourself clearly enough that when the moment comes, you are responding rather than reacting, present rather than overwhelmed, grounded rather than swept. The breaking is coming. The cup is overflowing. And what pours out of it, what finally finds its way from the other side of the silence into the open space between you, is going to ask something of the person who receives it. Not compliance, not immediate forgiveness, not the suspension of everything that the silence cost in favor of the warmth of the reconnection. Presence. Simply, completely, fully yourself presence. The specific quality of being there, all the way there, not managing the moment from a protected remove that allows what is real to be recognized as real and what is not to be recognized as not. You have that quality. You have always had it. It is one of the things about you that made the silence necessary, that made the feeling so large it required containment, that makes the breaking inevitable. Because you are the kind of person whose realness calls the realness out of others, whose genuine presence makes performance untenable, whose full and honest way of being in the world creates, in the people who encounter it, a pressure toward their own fullness and honesty that the silence was the last remaining defense against. Soft sigh, the defense is falling. What stands behind it, unmanaged, unfiltered, finally and completely itself, is on its way to you, with all the force of something that was contained too long, with all the tenderness of something that never stopped being what it was beneath the containment, with all the specific, irreplaceable nobody else produces, this quality of feeling that belongs exclusively to the person on the other side of your silence. Stand in it when it arrives. Let it reach you. And then, from the full height of everything you have become in the time that the silence lasted, respond with the only thing that has ever actually moved anything in this connection: your truth. Completely without edit, without management. Yours. If this in-depth collective reading found you exactly where you needed to be found tonight, if something here named the specific weight of what you have been carrying through the silence and what is preparing to change, stay close. subscribe and come back, because the story of the silence ending is only the first line of the chapter that comes after it. And the next reading will be there for every word that follows.